Welcome to Economy Originals, original stories of founders, brands, and global business power.
Someone predicted bankruptcy. Nobody knows how. In 2013, a group of researchers in Galicia, Spain, set out to answer a question that had haunted financial analysis for decades. How do you know a company is going to fail before it fails?
Is it happening? Is it happening now?
The conventional answer had always been, you look at the numbers. Profit margins, debt ratios, cash flow, the balance sheet. That's what Edward Altman did in 1968 when he built the first serious bankruptcy prediction model. 5 financial ratios, a simple formula. You could run it by hand in an afternoon. It worked, and for decades, that was the template.
Almost there!
Well, is he a champ?
But the researchers in Galicia tried something different. They didn't look at what the companies owned or owed. They looked at how the companies behaved. Specifically, how they behaved around their auditors. They built a data set of 256 small and medium-sized companies. Half of them financially healthy, half of them already in insolvency proceedings. And instead of pulling balance sheets, they pulled audit histories. How many times had each company changed its auditor in the last 10 years? How many reports had accumulated serious qualifications? The kind that flag irregular accounting, hidden liabilities, uncertainty about whether the business could survive. How many times had a company simply failed to file its annual accounts with the commercial registry? The Spanish equivalent of burying a report you don't want anyone to read. The logic was uncomfortable, but hard to argue with. A healthy company has no reason to rotate its auditors constantly. No reason to accumulate a trail of qualified reports. No reason to miss filing deadlines. But a company under financial stress behaves differently. It pushes back against its auditors. It delays. It buries inconvenient reports. And in doing so, it leaves traces. Not in the numbers, in the behavior.
It has right angles.
He has his mother's corners! I need the chief of surgery.
It's a boy. Well, yes, it's ours.
The researchers built 2 models from this data. The first one was a logistic regression, a statistic model that assigns a probability of failure based on a set of weighted variables. It's not elegant, but it's transparent. You can open it up and read exactly why it flagged a company as high risk, which variable triggered the alarm, how much each factor contributed to the final score. It predicted bankruptcy correctly in roughly 84% of cases. Not bad. Not bad at all. The second model was a neural network, a system loosely inspired by the structure of the human brain. Layers of interconnected nodes that process inputs, adjust their own internal weights through thousands of iterations of trial and error, and gradually learn to recognize patterns that no human analyst would ever see. It predicted bankruptcy correctly in roughly 90% of cases. Better. Meaningfully better. But here's the problem.
He's perfect! Look at those corners!
Congratulations.
Ask the logistic regression why it flagged a company, and it can answer. It points to specific variables, concrete patterns, numbers that deviate from the norm. You can follow its reasoning step by step, like reading a map. You might not like where it leads, but you can always see where you are. Specific, traceable, auditable. Ask the neural network why it flagged the same company, and it cannot tell you. Not because the researchers didn't try, but because the model's decision emerges from millions of internal calculations, distributed across layers of nodes, none of which correspond to a concept a human can name. There is no single variable you can point to, no threshold you can verify, no reasoning you can follow. It knows the answer. It just can't show how it works. In academia, this is called interpretability problem. In practice, it has a simpler name: the black box. Now, in a research paper, that's an interesting limitation. Something to note in the conclusion section. A direction for future work. But financial analysis is not a research paper. That experiment in Galicia was in 2013. Today, models like that one don't sit in research papers. They run banks. They move markets. They decide who gets a loan and who doesn't. The black box is no longer theoretical.
Look at that. Perfect spatial reasoning.
It's a ring toy.
Exactly. That's 3 times in a row. 3 times.
I know. I was here.
Which leaves us with a question that turns out to be much harder than it sounds. If a system makes better decisions than any human, but cannot explain how it makes them, do you trust it? And perhaps more importantly, should you? The problem the industry prefers not to explain. The neural network in that study did something remarkable. It predicted failure before failure arrived. It just couldn't tell you how. In machine learning, there's a term for a system that produces outputs without being able to explain how it reached them. In machine learning, that silence has a name: the black box. But not all AI models are black boxes, and that difference is the whole point. On one side, you have what researchers call white box models. These are systems designed to be transparent by nature. Every decision they make can be traced back to a specific rule, a specific variable, a specific weight. You can open them up and read them, the way you'd read a recipe or a legal contract or a set of accounting rules. They're not always the most powerful tools in the box, but they're auditable. And in finance, auditability is not optional. Black box models work differently. They're not programmed with rules. They discover their own logic, buried inside millions of parameters that have no translation into human language. The results can be remarkable. The process remains invisible. Now, this trade-off between accuracy and explainability isn't just an observation. It's a documented finding across decades of research. The more complex a model becomes, the better it tends to perform. And the better it performs, the harder it becomes to explain. Researchers call this accuracy interpretability trade-off. And it sits at the center of every serious conversation about AI in finance. So what has the research community done about this? The academic world responded with an entire field dedicated to the problem. They called it explainable AI, XAI. Its purpose? Ensure that when an AI system makes a decision, someone outside the room can understand why. A regulator, an auditor, a client who just got rejected for a loan. The goal is to make AI accountable to all of them. It's an ambitious field, and it has been growing fast. XAI research exploded after 2019. The same year, black box models started being deployed at scale in real financial products. The field of explainability was built in response to systems that were already running, not before. And yet, despite all that research, the conclusion is uncomfortable. XAI has thrived in academic papers. In the real systems where financial decisions are made, it is largely absent. But there is another problem, less visible and perhaps more fundamental. The research community has not agreed on what a good explanation actually is. There is no common standard, no shared benchmark, which means that even if a financial institution claims its AI is explainable, there is no agreed way to verify that claim. You cannot regulate what you cannot define. As early as 2017, the Financial Stability Board raised the alarm, an international body dedicated to monitoring the global financial system. Their conclusion was clear. The opacity of AI models in finance was not an engineering problem. It was a stability problem. 9 years have passed since that warning. The models are more powerful now. The gap between what they can do and what they can explain is wider than ever. This is where the story stops being theoretical, because those black box models aren't running experiments, they're running markets. This isn't an experiment, it's your pension fund. Everything we've described so far has a name, a framework, a set of academic papers behind it. But the black box is not living in those papers, it's living here. The question is no longer whether AI can make financial decisions. It already does. The question is what happens when those decisions cannot be explained and the stakes are real. Let's start with the most visible case, trading. Modern financial markets are not moved primarily by human decisions. They are moved by algorithms, systems that analyze market conditions, identify opportunities, and execute trades in fractions of a second, faster than any human can perceive, let alone intervene. In that environment, the question of explainability takes on a very specific and very practical dimension. If an algorithm executes 10,000 operations in a single day, who signs off on those accounting entries? Who reviews them? Who is responsible if something goes wrong? This is not hypothetical. It is the operational reality of high-frequency trading and sits at the center of a problem that researchers have been circling for years. The accounting frameworks we used were designed for a world where humans made decisions, where there was a person who could explain, justify, and sign their name to each transaction. That world is receding. The second area where this tension plays out is closer to home: credit scoring. When you apply for a mortgage, a personal loan, or a credit card, your application is increasingly processed by a model, not reviewed by one, processed by one. The model has been trained on vast amounts of historical data, payment records, spending patterns, and demographic information. It produces a score. That produces a decision. And in many cases, no human being has reviewed that decision before it reaches you. The problem is not that these models are inaccurate. In aggregate, they often perform better than human reviewers. The problem is what happens at the edges, when the model is wrong, And it will be wrong for some people, some of the time. There is frequently no mechanism to understand why. No variable to challenge, no reasoning to appeal, just a decision. The third area is perhaps the most consequential: risk management and fraud detection. The systems that decide whether a transaction is suspicious, whether a company's financial behavior warrants closer scrutiny, whether a portfolio is exposed to risks that haven't materialized yet. A 2025 study examining AI adoption across financial firms found that risk management and fraud detection are among the areas where AI has penetrated most deeply. These are also the areas where the consequences of unexplained decisions are most severe. A fraud detection system flags a transaction as suspicious. A risk model raises an alert on a company's financial health. In both cases, the same question arises. If the model cannot explain why it flagged what it flagged, do you act on it? We saw a version of this problem in the opening of this documentary. The neural network predicted corporate bankruptcy with 90% accuracy. Auditors, investors, regulators, all the people who needed to act on that prediction were left with a result and no reasoning. That was a research experiment. Scale it to the systems that manage real portfolios, real credit books, real trading desks, and the stakes of that silence change entirely. In each of these three areas, trading, credit, risk, the pattern is the same. A model that performs, a decision that lands, and a gap where the explanation should be. That gap has a cost. Sometimes it's measured in a wrongly denied loan, sometimes in a missed fraud alert, and sometimes in a systemic risk that nobody saw coming because nobody could read the model that should have flagged it. The law is 10 years behind. The financial system has a new infrastructure. Algorithms making decisions at a scale and speed no human can match. Decisions that, as we've seen, often cannot explain themselves. The question that follows is unavoidable. Is anyone regulating this? In July 2024, the European Union published its answer. The AI Act, Regulation 2024-1689, became law. The first comprehensive legal framework for artificial intelligence anywhere in the world. The law takes a risk-based approach. It classifies AI systems into 4 categories: unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk. The higher the risk, the stricter the obligations. And for the financial sector, the classification is unambiguous. Credit scoring systems, insurance risk models, algorithmic lending tools, all classified as high risk under the Act, which means all of them are subject to a set of obligations that, until now, most of the industry has operated without. Technical documentation, data traceability, human oversight, and explainability, the requirement that operators be able to understand and interpret what their systems are doing. On paper, this is exactly what the problem demands. A legal framework that forces the industry to confront the black box, to open it up, to justify what's inside. In practice, the picture is considerably more complicated. The first complication is time. The AI Act entered into force in August 2024, but the rules that apply to high-risk AI systems, the financial models we've been discussing, don't become fully enforceable until August 2026 at the earliest. And for some categories, the deadline extends to August 2027. Which means that right now, as this documentary is being made, the most consequential rules of the most ambitious AI regulation ever written are only just beginning to apply. The systems have been running for years. The oversight is arriving late. The second complication is deeper. The law requires explainability, but it does not define what a sufficient explanation looks like. As we saw in the previous act, the research community hasn't agreed on that either. A legal obligation without a technical standard is difficult to enforce, and difficult to enforce is easy to avoid. The third complication is geographic. The EU AI Act applies within the European Union. It also applies to providers outside the EU if their systems produce outputs that affect people inside the EU. That's a significant reach, but it's not global. The United States has no equivalent federal law. China has its own framework, focused on different priorities. Across Latin America, the regulatory landscape is fragmented at best. In some markets, it is effectively absent. A 2026 study examining AI adoption in financial systems documented the case of Venezuela, where the only existing guidance on AI and cryptocurrency accounting is a preliminary bulletin issued in 2020. Not a law, a bulletin, 6 years old. This is not an anomaly. It is a window into how much of the world operates. And it raises a question that the EU AI Act, for all its ambition, cannot answer on its own. Regulation, then, is necessary but not sufficient. It is arriving late, applying unevenly, and asking for something, explainability, that the industry has not yet agreed how to deliver. And underneath all of that, there is a question the regulation does not ask. Not whether companies can comply, but whether they want to. The power behind the opacity. The regulation exists, the research exists. The problem is documented, named, and formally acknowledged by some of the most powerful institutions in the world. And yet, the black box remains. Which raises a question that is more uncomfortable than any we've asked so far. Not whether the problem can be solved, but whether the people who could solve it have any reason to. Let's start with a fact that rarely gets stated directly. An explainable model is a replica model. If the internal logic of an AI system can be understood, traced, documented, explained step by step, then, in principle, a competitor can reconstruct it. The black box is not just a technical limitation. It is also a competitive advantage. The companies that have invested billions in developing the most powerful financial models have a rational economic interest in keeping those models opaque. Not necessarily out of malice, out of logic. Opacity protects investment. Transparency erodes it. This is the argument that the industry rarely makes out loud. But it is the argument that explains a great deal of what we observe. Why explainability research, despite years of investment, hasn't crossed from academia into production. Why the most sophisticated models deployed in financial markets are precisely the ones that resist interpretation. Why the loudest voices against strict explainability requirements tend to come from the companies with the most to lose from them. There is a second dimension to this power problem, and it goes beyond the opacity of individual models. The infrastructure that makes these models possible, the computing power, the training data, the foundational architectures, is concentrated in the hands of very few actors. handful of companies control the chips. A handful of companies control the cloud. A handful of companies control the models that sit on top of both. When the infrastructure is that concentrated, the opacity of the models stops being just a technical problem. It becomes a structural one. The people who understand how the most powerful financial AI systems work are the people who built them. Everyone else, regulators, auditors, competitors, clients, is on the outside, looking at outputs, never at the process. That last question is the one that keeps regulators up at night. Because the history of financial regulation is, in part, a history of capital moving to wherever the rules are lightest. Offshore structures, regulatory arbitrage, jurisdictions that compete on the basis of what they don't require. There is no reason to think that AI will be different. If Europe demands explainability and the rest of the world doesn't, the most opaque models don't disappear. They relocate. Which brings us to perhaps the most important question of this act. Not whether the black box can be opened, but who decides whether it should be, and who has the power to enforce that decision. The opacity of the black box, in this light, is not just a technical inconvenience, it is a form of power. The power to make decisions that affect millions of people on credit, on employment, on risk, without having to justify those decisions to anyone outside the system. That power is not evenly distributed. It never has been. AI is not creating that asymmetry, but it is accelerating it and making it harder to see. Three exits, none of them easy. What actually can be done? We have spent this documentary building a case. The case that the most powerful AI systems operating in financial markets today cannot explain their own decisions. That the research community has known this for years and hasn't closed the gap. That the regulation is arriving late, applying unevenly, and asking for something the industry hasn't agreed how to deliver. And underneath all of it, there are structural incentives that make opacity not just a technical accident, but a rational choice. That case is solid, but what comes next is harder. There are three serious proposals on the table. None of them is easy. None of them is complete. But they are the three directions in which the conversation is actually moving, and they deserve to be examined honestly. The first is regulation. The EU AI Act is the most ambitious attempt yet to bring the black box under legal control. Its logic is sound if you classify high-risk AI systems and impose explainability requirements. You create a legal floor below which the industry cannot operate. The problems, as we've seen, are real. The standard for what counts as a sufficient explanation doesn't exist. The enforcement mechanisms are untested, and the regulation covers one jurisdiction in a global system. But the alternative, no regulation, is not neutral. It is a choice to leave the current situation in place. And the current situation, as the Financial Stability Board warned in 2017, carries systemic risk. The second proposal is technical. Explainable AI as an industry standard. The argument here is that the gap between accurate models and interpretable ones is closing. That hybrid architectures, systems that combine the predictive power of black box models with interpretability layers that can justify their outputs, are becoming more viable. that with sufficient investment and the right incentives, it may be possible to have both accuracy and explanation, performance and accountability. The honest version of this argument acknowledges its own limits. The research has been growing for years. The adoption hasn't followed. And as we've established, the reasons for that gap are not purely technical. XAI as a standard requires not just that the technology works, it requires that the industry chooses to use it, which brings us back to incentives. The third proposal is perhaps the most pragmatic. Mandatory human oversight in the decision loop. Not replacing AI with humans, but requiring that for decisions above a certain threshold of consequence, a loan denial, a fraud flag, a risk classification, a qualified human must be able to reconstruct, review, and if necessary, override the model's output. The AI decides, the human validates. And the validation must be meaningful, not a rubber stamp on a process nobody understands. This approach has its own costs. It is slower, it is more expensive. In markets where algorithms operate in milliseconds, mandatory human review is operationally difficult and in some contexts, effectively impossible. But it is the only proposal that directly addresses the accountability gap without waiting for either regulation to mature or technology to catch up. 3 proposals, each with genuine merit, each with genuine limitations. The honest answer is that none of them alone is sufficient, and that the most likely path forward involves all 3 in combination, imperfectly, over time. Regulation setting the floor, technology raising the ceiling, human oversight filling the gap in between. What none of these proposals can do on their own is answer the deeper question this documentary has been circling. Not how to make the black box more transparent, but who decides whether it needs to be, and whether the people with the power to make that decision have any interest in doing so. That question does not have a technical answer. It has a political one, and political answers require something that algorithms by definition cannot provide: a choice. Closing. The question we started with. In 1968, an economist named Edward Altman built a model to predict corporate bankruptcy. 5 financial ratios. A formula you could write on a single page. You could follow every step of its reasoning. You could challenge any of its assumptions. You could understand completely why it reached the conclusion it reached. It was not perfect, but it was accountable. Today, the models that predict bankruptcy and creditworthiness and fraud and market risk are among the most complex artifacts human beings have ever built. They process information at a scale no human can match. They identify patterns no human would find. They are, in many cases, right more often than any human alternative, and they cannot tell you why. We have gained precision. The question this documentary has tried to ask, honestly, without easy answers, is what we have lost in exchange. Not just technical interpretability, something larger. The ability to hold a system accountable. To ask it why. To disagree with its reasoning. To demand that it justify itself to the people whose lives it affects. The question does not have an answer yet. It is being written right now, in the models being deployed, in the regulations being drafted, in the decisions being made or not made by the people with the power to make them. We are, all of us, inside this story, whether we can read it or not.